Joe Walsh's life has been full of amazing highs and terrible lows. Walsh's story is full of sadness and strength. His mother's classical training made him interested in music at a young age, and he lost his father and daughter, which was very sad. Even though he fought addiction and became famous with the Eagles, he carried a heavy load that not many people could see. Now that he is 76, Walsh is finally telling the truth about his life as a rock star, proving what his friends and fans have always thought about his private fights. Keep listening to find out. Joe Walsh got his start in music in a time of both ability and tragedy. Joseph Fiddler Walsh was born on November 20th, 1947, in Wichita, Kansas. Music was more than just a hobby for him. He was born with it. His mother, a classical musician, taught him to love music when he was very young. But when his father died suddenly in a plane crash, it left a hole in their lives that Joe and his mother had to fill as they moved from place to place. They finally found a safe place to live in Montclair, New Jersey. Young Joe took his first real steps into music in Montclair. He learned to play the guitar when he was 10 years old because he liked the sound and energy of rock bands like the Beatles. Even though he played the oboe in the school band, his real love was the electric guitar, which gave him a way to express himself and be artistic. As Joe got older, he found his way to Kent State University, where he first thought about a life dedicated to music. He was already playing with Ohio bands at this point, which helped him improve his skills and confidence. He joined a band at Kent State called the Measles, and soon after he took the lead role in the hard rock trio James Gang. They quickly became famous in Northeast Ohio, playing for big names like Fleetwood Mac, The Who, and even Led Zeppelin. But there was still darkness on the way. Walsh was at Kent State on May 4th, 1970, when National Guard troops opened fire on a peaceful student protest, killing 4 and hurting many more. The event changed Joe's life and left an everlasting mark on his heart. As a Gold Star son, Joe was already used to loss. When Joe was a baby, his flight teacher father died on the job. The tragedy at Kent State made him think even more about life and peace. Years later, on the 50th anniversary of that terrible day, Joe Walsh thought back and talked about how shocked and hurt he was to see his friends die from gunfire. The memory made him think of how fragile the balance is between rage and hope. In his songs and in his sense of purpose, the events of that day would always be with him. After a lot of experience and a fresh look at things, Walsh finally left the James Gang and started a new journey by forming the band Barnstorm with Joe Vitale and Kenny Passarelli. After his time with the James Gang, in 1972, Joe Walsh was at an artistic crossroads. Instead of joining a well-known group or sticking to a single theme, he chose to go his own way. Walsh put together a new band called Barnstorm with his college friend Joe Vitale on drums and Kenny Passarelli on bass. This was more than just a project, it was a brave look into sound, adding rock, folk, jazz, and even some Caribbean style to their music. That year's self-titled debut record was a big change that showed how talented Walsh was not only as a guitarist but also as an adventurous composer. Walsh's daring creativity found an audience that really liked the record, even though it didn't top the charts. Tracks like Turn to Stone and Mother Says stood out because they showed how smart his lyrics were and how creatively he played the guitar. For people who like music, Barnstorm wasn't just a band, it was a way for Walsh to explore new sounds and show how his art was changing over time. During this time, other artists, including the members of the Eagles, started to notice Walsh's skills. They would later join his band. Barnstorm's second album, The Smoker You Drink, The Player You Get, came out in 1973. It had the hit song Rocky Mountain Way slide guitar and a laid-back beat make this song stand out. Turned Walsh into a major solo act, marking a turning point in his career. Even though Barnstorm broke up in 1974, it had a huge impact on Walsh's career. Having the freedom to be creative with Barnstorm for a few years gave him the confidence and skills to grow as an artist. This stage was very important in making him the artist he was to become. It set him up for future success with the Eagles and cemented his place in rock history. The Barnstorm broke up a year later, and Joe Walsh was at the top of his game when he joined the Eagles, one of the most important rock bands of the 1970s. He joined at the right time, since founding member Bernie Leadon was leaving, and the band was moving toward a heavier, guitar-driven sound. Walsh had a magnetic stage personality, played the guitar like no one else, and had a subtle musicality that fit the Eagles' changing style perfectly. This relationship not only helped the band reach new heights, but it also made Walsh famous all over the world. Walsh was very important to the Eagles' famous 1976 album Hotel California, which came out soon after he joined. He played some of the most famous guitar duets in rock history, especially with Don Felder on the title track. The haunting riff from Hotel California is still one of the most famous guitar solos ever, drawing people in with its mystery beauty. Life in the Fast Lane was another great song that Walsh brought to the Eagles. The song, which started as a simple but catchy guitar riff, became a huge hit and showed how good Walsh is as both a singer and a guitarist. It showed off the band's new, darker sound, which was different from their folk rock roots and more rock-like. Walsh's powerful guitar playing helped the band change their style, which helped them become stadium rock stars and reach more people. His daring spirit and artistic flair gave the Eagles a boost and made his friendship with bandmates Glenn Frey and Don Henley stronger. Even though the Eagles were already famous before Walsh joined, it was after he joined that they had their most popular and praised period. It was at this time that Joe Walsh joined the Eagles that their now iconic album Hotel California was making waves around the world. But behind all of his success was a sad part of his life that not many people knew about. Walsh married Stephanie Rhodes just a few years before, in 1971. In 1972, they had a daughter together, Emma. There was no one left in their family, but disaster struck in 1974. A careless driver caused a terrible car crash that hurt little Emma's head very badly. Even though everyone tried, she died that very night, leaving her parents in a sea of sadness. It's so sad that Joe was on tour when the accident happened, and he ran home to deal with the terrible loss. For Walsh and his wife Stephanie, the accident was the start of a rough time. As they dealt with their sadness, their relationship began to fall apart, which eventually led to their divorce. Joe was in a lot of pain after losing Emma, and he had a hard time getting through the dark times. He put all of his sadness into his music. In 1974, he released a song called Song for Emma, which was a very personal ode to his daughter. When he talked to Rolling Stone in 2016, Walsh talked about how Emma's death has changed his life in many ways. He admitted that he was very angry at God and the world, which made him have a so-what attitude that made him do bad things to himself. He turned to drugs and drink to dull his pain and block out the truth he couldn't stand the thought of facing. Even though he was having a hard time, Joe found a way to remember his daughter. To the north of Boulder Park. To honor Emma, he built a small memorial pond that would give him a quiet place to think and connect with her spirit. Joe Walsh did everything he could to live the rock and roll life. It was normal to stay up late, party hard, and do things that hurt yourself. No matter how crazy he was, it didn't stop him from being very successful, even though he was really close to ruining himself. Walsh knew something had to change in the end, though. No matter how exciting everything looked, He couldn't keep up with his current lifestyle, and he was about to snap. It's a better place to work in the music business now that it's changed over time. Things were very different when Walsh was at his best, though. Hedonism was almost expected, and the constant stress of traveling made drugs and alcohol easy to get. A lot of singers saw drug abuse as a normal part of growing up, and a lot of artists got caught up in its destructive cycle. This cost the business world a lot of talented people. Some people died way too soon because they couldn't get away from their addiction. But Joe Walsh did something that not many people do. He made the decision to face his problems straight on. It was hard and difficult for him to get sober. There will be no nighttime change. Walsh told Billboard in an honest 2018 interview that booze and other drugs had become his higher power, a crutch that kept him alone and brought out the worst in him. He became angry and resentful, which made people avoid him and hurt his job. Like many actors, Walsh used alcohol to help him deal with stage fright at first. The thought of stepping on. Walsh told his story in his song One Day at a Time from 2012, giving fans an honest look at the ups and downs of addiction. In a 2016 interview with Rolling Stone, Walsh talked about his problems and how, for years, he kept up a front to hide how much his addiction was hurting him. But in the end, it was too much for him, and it led him down darker roads that almost killed him. He might have been saved by hitting rock bottom, giving him the boost he needed to fix things before it was too late, which was a sad fate that many of his peers couldn't avoid. Joe Walsh brought more than just great guitar skills to the Eagles when he joined in 1975. People knew him for living a crazy, uncertain life. His hotel room adventures were just as famous as his music, which made some people wonder if he'd fit in with the Eagles' more laid-back style. The band had their doubts behind closed doors. They were afraid that Walsh's wild parties would go against their image. He did get the band kicked out of a few places because of his wild side. But Walsh's instrumental skill could not be denied. With his guitar riffs, energy, and songs, he gave the Eagles' sound a new edge. Years later, Walsh told the Daily Mail that his wild behavior wasn't just a phase of being a rock star. They were a cover for deep-seated fear, with stars like Glenn Frey and Don Henley nearby. Walsh often felt like he had something to prove because they were known for writing great songs and having great voices. This feeling of not being safe led him to act recklessly and abuse drugs. Walsh's life got worse after the Eagles broke up in 1980. Without the organization of the band, his drug use got worse, and it got worse when he was dating Stevie Nicks. Their relationship turned into a bad circle of partying and drugs, and over time. Nicks himself stated that their relationship was fueled by their drug use. Walsh had to face his inner problems when the Eagles got back together in 1994. It was his colleagues, especially Timothy B. Schmidt, who told him to get help because they were worried about his health. It was more than just a chance to play music again at this get-together. Walsh got the drive he needed to take back his life. He decided to stop drinking and using drugs. This was the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He thought he couldn't handle things without alcohol. But his friends' help and the ideas of Alcoholics Anonymous helped him put his life back together day by day. Walsh's story of getting sober has become what people know him for today. Even though he was famous and successful at his peak with the Eagles, it's his personal growth that really stands out. His work at the First Step to Recovery Treatment Center shows how determined he is to stay sober. It's a lesson that even famous people can change. Stevie Nicks, the beautiful voice and heart of Fleetwood Mac, once told a story about love and loss that many of us can relate to. Joe Walsh, the famous Eagles guitarist, is at the heart of this story. Nicks often calls him the love of her life. They fell in love in the 1980s, and it was like a rock and roll fairy tale. There was a deep link between these two famous musicians who were both at the top of their games. Nix even said she loved Walsh more than anyone else. It's more than her songs and her job. They met at a hotel bar and hit it off right away. Nix fell in love with Walsh right away. Their love was strong, powerful, and filled them up completely. But as with many stories told in the rush of fame, darker forces made their connection more difficult. There was a long cloud of drug abuse over their time together, as much as love held them together. Together, they also lived a bad life that slowly destroyed the basis of their relationship. Nix is honest about this and says that their drug problems made them lose focus on everything else. Walsh had to make the hard choice to leave in the end. It broke Nix's heart and left her broken. It took a long time and was painful for her to get better, but she did it and learned from that rough time. She put her sadness and love into her music, especially in the song "Has Anyone Ever Written Anything for You?" A sad tribute to the love they had for each other. When Walsh thought back on their time together, it was both sweet and clear, even after everything was over. He called Nix more than just a lover, he called her his soulmate. But he saw their relationship as more like a sibling bond, formed by the chaos and pain of their shared battles. Their love for each other was very strong, but their addiction got too heavy for them, and they finally split up. In the past of rock, supergroups have come and gone, often quickly becoming popular and then disappearing. Some, like Cream, became heroes, while others broke up just as quickly because of egos and different ideas. A different group was Joe Walsh's The Best in the early 1990s. They did not become famous or fall apart in a big way. Instead, they disappeared as quickly as they came, leaving only a short and strange trail. It was the early 1990s. Walsh, who was known for his work with the Eagles, put together a great group of singers. Don't think this was just any group. He worked with people like John Entwistle, Keith Emerson, Simon Phillips, and Rick Livingston. When someone calls themselves the best, people have very high hopes for them. In September 1990, they went on a short tour of Japan, where they played songs from the careers of each member. The set list was full of hits: Life in the Fast Lane by Eagles, Reelin' in the Years by Steely Dan, and Fanfare for the Common Man by Emerson, Lake and Palmer are some of their tunes. People who didn't like the tour were quick to say what they thought. Rolling Stone said that the band's only less well-known member, Rick Livingston, had a hard time keeping up with the heritage of Don Henley, Roger Daltrey, Donald Fagen, and Greg Lake. But the best had made an impact, even if it was only for a short time. In a time when technology has changed the music business, Joe Walsh chose to go in a different direction. In his 11th record by himself, Analog Man, Walsh went against the grain. He didn't like the polished, digital sound that most current music has. Instead, he wanted to get back to the raw, unprocessed essence of the past by using analog recording methods again. Walsh wasn't just making a record when he did that. He was putting something out there. People tell stories about Walsh's life in rock and roll. He lived the rock star dream to the fullest in the 1970s and 1980s. Wild parties, trashed hotel rooms, and a fast-paced way of life were all signs of the decade's excesses. For rock fans, he became a symbol of their wild spirit. But behind the pranks was a musician with amazing skills. Some of rock's most famous guitar riffs and songs were made by him with bands like the Eagles and the James Gang. This put him in the same league as guitar greats like Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix. Even though Walsh was successful, his personal life was on the edge because he was abusing drugs, which could have hurt his health and job. In the late 1980s, Walsh was at a turning point. To reach rock bottom was to realize how bad things really were in the life of rock and roll excess. Walsh knew he had to make a big change if he wanted to stay alive and do well. He set out on the path to sobriety with a lot of drive. It was a long and hard road, but it led to a personal rebirth. Walsh found a focus and peace of mind that he hadn't had in years when he stopped drinking. This change in himself not only changed his life, but it also changed his music. When I got sober, I started writing songs that were deeper and more about myself. He used music as therapy to work through his feelings and tell his story in an open and honest way. Analog Man was what came out of this trip. Not only was it a return to analog sound, it was also a return to the real thing. The album, which was made with a great group of musicians including Jeff Lynne and Ringo Starr, showed how much Walsh loved music again. Many parts of the record were produced in a clean way by Lynne, but Walsh made sure the music still had a natural, raw sound. He spoke out against how much technology is used in modern music, instead aiming for a sound that felt real and lived in. The ideas of Analog Man are very close to home. The lyrics talk about gratitude, personal growth, and reflection. They show what was going through Walsh's mind as he dealt with his past and accepted his present. Walsh's humor and insight are on full display in the title track, which makes fun of the difficulties of managing the digital world. But it's the album's quieter moments that show how vulnerable he is. Being sober had started a new part of his life, and it let him write songs that were honest and self-aware in a way that touched people deeply. Walsh was honest in talks about how getting sober had not only saved his life but also made him love music again. He admitted that he had tried to follow the latest trends for a while, but in the end he learned that staying true to himself was more important. Walsh made the album Analog Man to honor that realization. It was a record that loved the past while also being strongly rooted in the lessons of the present.